Das war jetzt ein bisschen blöd. Und dann muss ich noch was machen, oder?
Werden wir gleich sehen. So.
All right. Jetzt kommen wir. Wir sind schon hier entstanden. Also wir lassen das hier.
Okay, jetzt könnt ihr anfangen.
Super. Und Präsentation?
Dear audience here in the library of the Center for Historical Research of the Polish Academy of Science in Pankow, dear viewers online, my name is Ariana Psari, and I welcome you on behalf of the Center of Historical Research and my institution, the institution I work for, the Center. Is it okay? I hear everybody is the Center of Historical Research and my institution, the institution I work for, the Center. Is it okay? I hear everybody is
So this is the presentation. We have to go to the YouTube live.
Sorry, I will soon start again.
Just one second.
Just wait.
We have to figure this out. How is it? So this is Zoom, yes, and YouTube is over here. Maybe we have to.
Sorry, I will soon start.
Yes, go over here, please, and Klaus-Zernack is mute, unmute. Here.
Okay.
I think this is the only way. Yeah, exactly. Now we can start. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, sorry for all the technical problems. I start again. Dear audience, here in the library of the Center for Historical Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Pankow, dear viewers online, my name is Ariana Psari, and I welcome you on behalf of the Center and of the institution I work for, the German Cultural Forum for Central and Eastern Europe in Potsdam. Only 2 weeks ago, we sat here on the occasion of the previous colloquium entitled Ukraine, Threats to Cultural Heritage in War Times. Hanna Rudik and Olena Balun, 2 Ukrainian art historians, gave us an impressive account of the challenges facing the reorientation of Ukrainian museums in the near future. Today, we look into the past, to the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. At this time, there was a trend to create regional museums in European countries. In Prussia, such museums were opened in the capitals of 12 provinces, and they had an important role in shaping the regional identity of the province. In the province of Posen, the situation for regional museums was more delicate than elsewhere, as this province was inhabited by a substantial Polish population. The museum operated against a complex historical background, and collecting conditions and their functions and goals were often viewed with indifference or hostility by the local non-German population. In Poznan, the German museum ignored the Polish audience, following a policy that aimed at strengthening the local identity of German residents. Today's event is part of the annual theme of the Klaus-Zernack-Colloquium series, Museums, Collections, and the Art Market, Enhanced Perspective. The whole series and recordings of past colloquia can be found on the website of the Center for Historical Research and the German Cultural Forum. For the good cooperation on the series and the joint conception, I would like to thank Milena Wozniak-Koch and the whole team of the Center of Historical Research. I am grateful that with our reference and our moderator, we are able to present you a highly competent panel for our topic. First, today we will listen to the lecture by Kamila Klub-Kierich, about the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan from 1904 to 1919, between nation and region, between cultural policy and local identity. Kamila Klutkiewicz studied humanities, law, and art history at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. Her research interests concern the history of collecting, museology, and material culture in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. Since 2015, she is assistant professor at the Institute of Art History. Since 2021, head of the Audiovisual Archive of the Faculty of Art Sciences at the Adam Mickiewicz University. Since 2021, she is also team coordinator in the project Digital Research Infrastructure for Humanities and Art Sciences, financed by European funds under the Intelligent Development Program. After that, we will hear Vasco Kretschmann with a commentary on Camilla's contribution, and he will expand the example of the Poznan Museum to include the perspective of Wrocław Museum approach to city history. Vasco Kretschmann studied history and political science in Berlin and Warsaw, and completed his master's degree in public history at the Free University in Berlin in 2012. Dr. Vasco Kretschmann was awarded the Research Prize of Gesamtverein der deutschen Geschichts- und Altertumsvereine, as well as the DHU-Preis for his publication Breslau Museal, Musealne Wrocław, Polish and German historical exhibitions to 1900 to 2010. He is head of the Department of Peace Education at Schools and University at the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge e.V. Finally, Milena Wozniak-Koch will moderate the discussion with the two and also integrate questions from the audience. Milena graduated from the Institute of Art History at the University of Gdańsk in 2010. In 2020, she received her doctorate from the University of Warsaw with a thesis, Art Collection and Identity, Art Collecting by the Warsaw Bourgeoisie and Intelligentsia of Jewish Origin as an expression of cultural and national identification, for which she was awarded the prestigious Professor Chancellor Detloff Prize. In 2014-15, she lectured at the Collegium Civitas in Warsaw on the history of Polish art collecting. Since July 2020, she has been research associate here at the Center for Historical Research in Berlin. I will now hand over to Milena and beg all watchers via Zoom to send the notes for the discussion via the Q&A button. I wish you an enlightening evening.
Thank you very much, Ariane, for this kind introduction. And yes, we are having tonight our splendid guest, and we will follow the history of Kaiser Friedrich Museum, which I'm really excited about. As Ariane mentioned, we had also last time a very interesting seminar. All our seminars, I think, were really exciting and bringing something into this pan-European museum and collections perspective. As Ariane mentioned last time, we talked about Ukrainian museums and about like current situation, of course, affected by the war actions in Ukraine. And also we had a Kanienko museum presentation from Hanna Rudyk, which was also very interesting. And I think it might somehow overlap with today's topics. So of course, there's this broad topic of the European museum model, which is, I guess, similar in Berlin, in Paris, and perhaps in Warsaw, and perhaps in Kiev. We will see. Maybe this will be a point to discuss afterwards. But there was also another seminar. It was a few months ago. It was about Wilhelm von Bode. We were discussing Bode's concept of museums and also his input into the art market. This was a seminar with Dr. Joanna Smalcerz and Professor Getkens, was also, I think, somehow bringing a new light to Bode's person and his museum's policy. So maybe those are seminars which were thematically somehow overlapping with with today's seminar, as this was the original idea while creating the lineup for this year's seminars to bring the topics and bring the presentations which are somehow referring to each other, so that we can have an in-depth within each seminar, an in-depth view into the museums and collecting phenomenon. So just as Ariana mentioned, we are looking forward to comments and questions, of course, from the audience gathered here, and also from the online audience. So Q&A section is most welcome to be used. And now, just not to prolongate anymore, I hand it over to you. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Milena. Ariana, thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very delighted and I'm very happy to be here. And I'm very happy to be with our audience also. So I think I started.
Yes, of
Milena,
course, the presentation, yes, so we have to then, no. Bildschirm freigeben, yeah? Yay! This is the one, and this is the presentation, declination. Okay, freigeben. Yes. Is it okay?
No.
Try again. It's not this. It's not the start. This is the start. Thank you. Correct.
Everything is everything. Thank you very much.
Should we maybe make? Yeah. Okay. All right.
So thank you very much once again. The Kaiser Friedrich Museum was a German museum that operated between 1904 and 1919 in Poznan, then the capital of the Prussian province of Poznan, province Posen, in today's Poland, capital of Wielkopolska, Greater Poland. The museum was an institution with a wide range of collections and activities. Its collections included European art, contemporary painting, arts and crafts, Far Eastern art, archaeological collections, and natural history section, and monuments of local history and culture. The museum was under the authority of three bodies that financed its activities. These were the authorities of the Poznan province, that means the local government, the authorities of the city of Poznan, and the treasury of the Kingdom of Prussia. The Prussian authorities financed the seat of the museum, a neo-Baroque building designed in Berlin by Karl Hinkelgeim. The museum was very active in the field of exhibition and education, and that the attractiveness of its activities was reflected in its impressive visitor numbers, more than 80,000 in 1911. Contrast this figure with the population of Poznan at that time, which was 140,000. Such an impressive number of visitors, which would have been the envy of many contemporary museums institutions, suggests that in less than a few years, the museum had managed to build up a loyal and regular audience that regularly visited its doors. Intrigued by the reasons for the success of a museum that has only been operating in Poznan for a few years, I have attempted to look at the Kaiser Friedrich Museum from several perspectives. When I began my research on the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan, I was not entering unknown and uncharted territory. The awareness of the German museum in Poznan was quite high. All the more so because in 2024, on the occasion of the centenary of the opening of the German institution, its heir, the National Museum in Poznan, organized the exhibition presenting the achievements of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum and published a catalog. A constant reminder of the legacy of the German Museum in Poznan is the building of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, which has served the Polish Museum since 1919, with a break during the Nazi occupation, of course. In short, the history of the German Museum institution in Poznan is fairly well known. Research in terms of sources and more or less present in the consciousness of the city's inhabitants, today's city's inhabitants. My primary aim was to place this case study in a broader cultural, social, and political context. I therefore analyzed three areas of the German museum's activities. First, its establishment and functioning during an important period, the professionalization of European museums, and in particular, the reorganization and reform of the Berlin museums, which influenced other German cities. Second, the social dimension of museum activity, so museum education in the broadest sense at the turn of the 20th century, and the interaction between museum institutions and patrons, private collectors. And the third, the national context of its action. So the task of constructing the identity of the spectator, a German living in the eastern province of the empire, a region with a complex national situation and a complex history. As a result, what emerges from the book, at least this is what I hope, is a picture of an institution sensitive to the changes taking place in museology at the turn of the 20th century, and at the same time confronted with the activities of museums in the provincial capitals of Prussia, which at the beginning of the 20th century were faced with specific expectations, educational, social, and political. For the purpose of our meeting today, I have chosen one topic from the wide range of different themes present in the activities of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan. I would like to present the theme of the museum as an institution that aims to strengthen the German identity in general, on the one hand, and the identity of the German Poznanian, so a resident of a province with a complicated history and nationality situation in the 19th and early 20th century on the other. The German Kaiser Friedrich Museum, which opened in Poznan in 1904, was given specific objectives by the authorities in Berlin from the very beginning. They were already mentioned during the discussions on the financing of this institution. In 1899, in the Chamber of Deputies of the Prussian Landtag, the Minister of Finance, Johannes von Michel, when agreeing to co-finance the museum's activities with the local authorities of the provinces and Poznan, announced, and that's a quotation, "Gentlemen, in order to achieve this aim, to strengthen the German character of this province, to increase German culture, German customs, German education, and German national feeling through a positive rather than a negative influence, we will have to make even more expenditures of this kind. Also in other towns, especially smaller towns in the province of Poznan are most threatened. But gentlemen, I believe that this task corresponds to the historical position that the Prussian state has assumed in this region. It has never been very prosperous, although I am convinced that under very favorable conditions, it can gradually achieve a level of prosperity that is no way inferior to that of other areas. But for this to happen, the whole Prussian state will have to make sacrifices. If I may use the old word, we want to bring German culture to the East. And gentlemen, we are convinced, and I believe that German culture in the East means that strengthening of Germanness, admittedly not by defeating sections of the population who speak a language other than German, but ultimately it means our victory. Symbolically, this victory was marked by the location of the museum building on the corner of Wilhelm Square and Nova Street, on the road between the Old Town on Poznan, an area associated with the Polish period of the city's history and still inhabited mainly by Poles in the 19th century, and Wilhelm Square, an area rebuilt and arranged during the Prussian rule and leading to the new representative imperial quarter built by the German authorities at the beginning of the 20th century. Central to our thinking is the strengthening of German national feeling and German culture mentioned in the book. How would this be done and how would this effect be achieved within the walls of the museum? After the collapse of the Polish Ukrainian Commonwealth at the end of the 18th century, Greater Poland and Poznań, the cradle of Polish statehood in the Middle Ages, became part of Prussia and later the German Empire for more than a century. It is worth noting, however, that until the 1890s, the region was perceived by the authorities in Berlin as an agricultural province where little energy and resources were invested in cultural and educational development, while Poznań itself was considered by the German population to be an uncomfortable and unpleasant place to live. The city was crowded and, due to frequent flooding, also dangerous. As a result, on the one hand, the Germans who came here for several years of military or civil service felt no attachment to the region. On the other hand, their connection with the culture of their homeland was severed, as the city offered almost no opportunities for cultural development. The situation changed in the 1890s with the establishment of a number of cultural and scientific institutions in Poznań, including museum. This was due to the introduction of the so-called Hebungspolitik, a policy of civilizational and cultural upliftment of the Eastern Prussian provinces, including the modernization of the city of Poznań and the establishment of new representative buildings and institutions like the Royal Academy, a substitute university, the Kaiser Wilhelm Library, and finally the seat of the imperial castle. The activities of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum under the leadership of its director, Ludwig Kammerer, an art historian who, having been born in Gdańsk, was familiar with the problems of the eastern borderlands of the empire, led to strengthening of German national feeling and German culture in a number of areas. As a result, the viewer, usually a German civil servant, military officer, teacher, but also, as the museum statistics on visits to the reading room and lecture hall show, a student, a merchant, a factory worker, a craftsman, and a woman without a profession left the institution with a particular image in mind. He or she knew that in the history of the province where he or she lived, there had been a culture of Protestant and Jewish communities for many centuries. He could compare the creations of local craftsmen with works from other eastern provinces, especially from Gdańsk, and he also felt that he was being informed about German. The Kaiser Friedrich Museum achieved these effects through, one, the content of its collection, two, its presentations of its display, and three, its program of temporary exhibition. Today, I will concentrate on the first 2 points. Preparation for the opening of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in 1904 revealed the shortcomings of the museum's collection. At that time, the museum's collection consisted of objects collected by the German Historical Society in Poznań, that means local historical and archaeological artifacts. Thanks to deposits and donations from Berlin museums, it was possible to present also a small collection of plaster casts, an equally modest gallery of paintings, and a very important element in the initial phase of the museum's collection building, the collection of Athanasiusz Raczyński, aristocrat from Greater Poland, who made his professional fortune in the Kingdom of Prussia. The vast majority of the museum's departments collect objects related to the province of Poznań. Only the collections of painting and plaster casts were intended to collect exhibits of European art in the broader sense. The development of the arts and crafts collection focused on the acquisition of German crafts, especially porcelain and ceramics, furniture, mostly from Gdańsk, and individual purchases of objects connected with their origin in Greater Poland. Let us stay with Gdańsk furniture, which the Kaiser Friedrich Museum has acquired for its collection on several occasions. The largest purchase of this kind took place in 1912. when several pieces of Gdańsk furniture were bought at the auction of the collection of the well-known Gdańsk collector Lesar Giełdziński at the Rudolf Lepke auction house in Berlin. It should be remembered that Gdańsk furniture was a kind of collector's phenomenon in the 19th century. The fashion for it among collectors began in the first half of the century and reached its peak at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. A characteristic feature of this collecting trend was that it involved both Polish and German collectors, with each nation attributing a different symbolic meaning to Gdańsk furniture. In the 19th century, Gdańsk rose in the Polish consciousness to become a symbol of the country's former glory. It was seen as a unique independent city, a free republic, and was prized as such in the memoirs of Polish travelers in the 19th century. In the residences of the Polish landed gentry, Gdańsk wardrobes were installed in dining rooms, drawing rooms, halls, and entrance halls. Exceptional creations, including entire rooms decorated in the Gdańsk style. In contrast, the official state-centered German vision, which emerged especially in the second half of the century, saw Gdańsk as a German city that would eventually, after many centuries, find itself back within the borders of the Prussian state. The narrative about the city referred primarily to the Hanseatic period of its history, and the union of the Hanseatic cities was seen as the prototype of German unification. Gdańsk furniture became popular in the residences of the German aristocracy and landed gentry in East and West Prussia and Silesia. At the end of the 19th century, Gdańsk objects found their way into both Polish and German museums, where they were incorporated into a specific historical narrative. In Polish institutions, they were seen as indigenous relics from the glory days of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, for example, like the Industrial Museum in Lwów, Lamek. In the Poznań Museum, the furniture was treated as exemplary products of German craftsmanship, which in turn was presented alongside European furniture and craftsmanship from the museum's rather modest collection. Visually, and more on this below, the Gdańsk furniture in this exhibition was juxtaposed with the products from Poznań, emphasizing the presence of developed craftsmanship in the eastern provinces of the empire and weaving its specimen into the story of the history of European applied arts. The rooms dedicated to the cultural, history, and arts and crafts collections were crucial to the education and training of the German visitor. Over time, the growing painting gallery, filled mainly with German works, also took on this function. The cultural history and arts and crafts collections occupied a representative space on the first floor on the south side. This monumental hall was divided by 4 high pillars into 3 integrated rooms. The first room was occupied by the cultural history collection, more precisely, the collection of cultural history antiquities from the province of Poznań. The very fact of its separation alluded to the Cultural Historical Museum that had been established in German countries since the middle of the 19th century. This institution usually had a local character and collected objects related to the broader cultural history of a given region. The arrangement of objects on each wall followed the principle of symmetry, which had been propagated in Berlin at the turn of the century by Wilhelm von Bode and his way of presenting works. Thus, the arrangement of the altar from the Lutheran church in Zaborowo, as you can see on the southern wall of the room, was complemented by an antependium from Leszno and liturgical vessels suggesting a readiness of performed rituals. On the other side, on the same wall, was a crucifix from the Lutheran church in Ostrów. Both special compositions on this wall, with the altar and the crucifix, were closed from above by iron balustrades of a similar semicircular shape. Even from the brief description of the soft wall of the room above, It is clear that an important place prominently displayed and marked in the presentation of local artifacts was occupied by objects from the evangelical churches of the province. The number of artifacts from Catholic and evangelical churches in the museum was similar, but the latter were strongly favored in the display. Information about the origin of each monument was included in description on the labels next to works and in the visitor guides. The appreciation of the monuments of the evangelical churches of Greater Poland in the museum exhibition should be seen in the wider context of German research into the art history of the region. The interest in the monuments of the Lutheran parishes can be found in the text of Julius Kochte, the author of the first catalogue of the monuments of the province, Hermann Ehrenberg, the author of the first synthesis of the history of art in Greater Poland, as well as in those of the employees of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum involved in the regional research. There are two simultaneous efforts of the authors in German publications. The first is an attempt to prove and convince the reader that the development of art in the region for centuries depended on the arrival of German artists and craftsmen. The second is to give value to the discourse on the monuments connected with the presence of the German population in Greater Poland. Of course, it will be risky to equate evangelicals with Germans in the perspective of the history of the region from 16th to 20th century. However, the aim was to convince Germans, the vast majority of whom were evangelicals living at the turn of the 20th century, that they could find points of reference of interest to them in the cultural history of the province. A similar role was to be played by a permanent place in the exhibition dedicated to Jewish monuments. The Jewish population of the province, especially those living in Poznań, was largely assimilated into German culture in the 19th century. Members of this minority were often donors of the German Historical Society and later to the Kaiser Friedrich Museum. And objects donated by them found their way into the permanent exhibition of the Cultural History collection. The next two rooms of this hall are dedicated to arts and crafts. So look at that entrance wall in the middle of the first room. The composition of the artifacts here, documented in the photograph, illustrates the intentions of the museum's management. The entrance, above which hangs a painting on lawn from the Berlin National Gallery, is flanked by panels displaying metalwork from various parts of Germany, below which are boxes. On the left, a piece of furniture from Schleswig-Holstein, on the right, a piece of furniture from Italy. On the first of these were pewter and copper vessels, mainly from the province of Poznań. Next to the wall were large wooden wardrobes. On the left, a barrow, one from Church of the Holy Cross in Poznań. On the right, a large vestibule, a wardrobe from Gdańsk. Behind the wardrobes, on the left, were oak fragments from an old German workshop, and on the right, Italian and Dutch wall tiles. So the exhibition in this room was thus organized in such a way as to place the artifacts from the eastern provinces of the German Empire, including the province of Poznań, in the wider perspective of German applied art and more generally European art. The painting gallery in the Kaiser Friedrich Museum was not very modest at first. The vast majority of the museum's collection consisted of painting of German artists working in the second half of the century. The variety of names was intended to show visitors the broad spectrum of artistic phenomena in Imperial Germany. As the viewer moved from one room to another, he or she could become familiar with the different names and stages in the development of German painting, including also local painting. It should be pointed out, however, that the building of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum itself foreshadowed this peculiar lecture on the history of German painting, of German art. art. In the facade facing the prestigious Wilhelm Square, the viewer could see tondos with mosaic portraits of German artists, Erwin von Steinbach, Hans Holbein, Peter Fischer, Albrecht Dürer, etc. The very entrance to the museum foreshadowed what was to be found inside the building and in the collection. So in the summary, the museum policy of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum can be seen as the result of two approaches: interest in the past and orientation towards the future. By visiting museum, a German resident of Poznan could learn about the history of the region in which he lived, see that German culture had been present in the region for several hundred years, and at the same time be in constant contact with contemporary German art and learn about its history. The strategies outlined above for the construction and consolidation of a German local and regional identity clearly show the extent to which the Kaiser Friedrich Museum targeted a German audience. Research by historians of Greater Poland under Prussian rule confirms that two communities, Polish and German, lived side by side in Poznan and only exceptionally came into closer contact with each other. In the course of the 19th century, the sense of separateness of tradition and history shaped Poznan's two-pole social structure. One pole was formed almost exclusively by the Polish community, the other by the German community and the much smaller Jewish community, which identified itself with German culture. This dual structure was also reflected in the coexistence of two museums in the city. The Polish Mierzyński Museum, affiliated to the Poznań Society of the Friends of Science, aimed its activities at the Polish inhabitants of the city and region, just as the Kaiser Friedrich Museum was to influence the German population. The institutions did not enter into a relationship with each other, although some mutual influences can be observed. The Polish Museum, whose name commemorates the aristocratic Mierzyński family, was founded on the basis of a collection built up by the local scientific society, but considerably enlarged thanks to several Mierzyński donations. These generous donations mean that when the museum opened in 1881, it had a very good collection of art displayed in its own building in several rooms, including one specially space for the exhibition. In addition to Polish paintings, the first presentation included monuments of the Greater Poland region, a model of the Gniezno door, that means a monument of medieval craftsmanship from the cathedral in Gniezno, the first capital of the Polish state, a model of the Poznań Town Hall, a gem of Renaissance architecture from the Polish period, and a model of the Golden Chapel in the Poznań Cathedral, that means built in the first half of the 19th century with contribution from the Polish community. At the same time, the Polish Museum was the first museum in Poznań to be open to the public and, at least initially, to be visited by Germans living in the city. The museum published bilingual visitor guides in Polish and German, and remained the only museum in the city for almost 20 years. At that time, the collections of the German Historical Society were rather modest compared to the Polish collection. The opening of the German Kaiser Friedrich Museum in 1904 changed the situation considerably. The German institution, with a much larger budget, the support of the authorities, and a clear plan of action, left the Polish Museum behind for several years. The success of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum was obvious, and it can be assumed that the assumptions behind its establishment were false. The museum flourished, attracting representatives of the German population, while at the same time it was consistently ignored by the Polish population, who sporadically appeared within its walls, always felt alienated, and, according to surviving sources, considered the Kaiser Friedrich Museum to be a German institution intended exclusively for a German audience. Looking at the Kaiser Friedrich Museum from a broader perspective, it can be considered a typical regional museum at the turn of the 20th century. The institution had works of European art, a good gallery of old paintings, but also local monuments, artistic, historical, archaeological, and natural. Thus, like other local museums that flourished throughout Europe and Germany, the museum was of great importance to the local community. In the case of the Poznań province, we can speak of a community made up largely of German visitors who had settled in Poznań as a result of their work, their profession, their career, usually in the civil or military fields. It was to this group, uprooted and with little connection to the city in which they lived, that the museum addressed its message. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kamila, for this excellent presentation. And let me just remind that this paper, Kamila's paper, was based on the monography of the Kaiser Wilhelm Museum, which is published in Polish, but it would be, I think, very highly recommended to translate it also into German, perhaps, as there are so many linking points with the Berlin Museum scene and with Wilhelm Bode, as I mentioned, and Hugo von Schudi, and so many interesting aspects when it comes to German cultural policy of the Wilhelmine era. So we are now awaiting your comment, Vasco. So thank you, Kamila, again, and Vasco, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Good evening, everyone. And yeah, first of all, I also would propose that this book should be translated into German. Yeah, thank you to the Polish Historical Institute and the German Cultural Forum for the kind invitation. It's an honor for me to speak about the impressive study by Kamila Kutkiewicz. Thank you for today's presentation and your important study about this particular museum. I would first like to talk about the consideration of museums and exhibitions, and then classify Kamila's results with a comparison, and then end with some questions. So here I will refer to my study that was mentioned before, Breslau Museal, about German and Polish history exhibitions, that luckily has been translated into Polish too. And yeah, we'll come to this later, but yeah, one result is not surprising in your book, and that is the presentation of visual arts is also a political matter. And it is connected with the narration of cultural history, especially in border regions, often connected with a diverse ethnic population. And it is to great importance, of course, to us, what is shown and what is not shown. And Kamila has succeeded brilliantly in this cultural study, this cultural political study of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznań. The presentation of arts is not neutral, especially not in this time and this region. And I have studied a large number of museums and exhibitions in another German-Polish contact region over a 100-year period, Lower Silesia. And for me, a central question arose, how do I examine exhibitions that no longer exist? Mm-hmm. And so in doing so, I drew on a series of historical culture, especially by Jon Rüsen, the German Geschichtsdidaktik, it's called, and here the model of dimensions of historical culture. And in my in-depth study of historical exhibitions, I worked with 4 dimensions, and starting from a central question, of course, what was shown in the museum, how, when, and why, by whom, and for whom. Mm-hmm. So this was always my question. I've developed analytical question for study the exhibition that take into account 4 dimensions. So the first dimension is the cognitive dimension, so the content. The second, the aesthetic, the presentation. The third is the political temporal, so the political and the time. And the fourth is the publicity, the audience. Those are the dimensions. And on the first level, on the content level, I examined what was shown in the exhibition and what was not shown. This is about recording which historical aspects were themed, presented, and which interpretation of history was made through such a selection. The second dimension is the presentation level, the aesthetics, and it reveals how the past was presented in the museum. This level refers to the museum language of form. An example, the representational means used and exhibition conceptual trends over time. In each case, against the respective institutional and temporal background. So always you have to see it, of course, in its context. These aspects of content and form language of an exhibition required ordering and interpretation, taking into account the political interpretation and reception of the exhibition. At the level of the political intention, so my third dimension, I have discussed when and why the identified aspects of urban history that my case study were shown, closely linked to the intention of the exhibition. Is the level of reception. It's a question of who the exhibition was aimed at and how it was perceived. So that's the fourth dimension. This aspect of the investigation asks about the target audience on the background of the socio-economic as well as the educational development of the museum presentation and reaction of the media and politics. So what I want to say is that Camilla did not work with those four dimensions in structural way, but she has looked at all those four dimensions. And she shows which artworks were shown, when and where and how they were presented. In addition to these cognitive and aesthetic aspects, she always asks about the political context, with what intention was the Kaiser-Friedrich Museum built, and above all, for whom, for which audience was the museum built. She argues that the museum was a project of the Prussian government to strengthen German culture in the region and was primarily aimed at a German audience. Finally, she also asked how this museum and its exhibition were perceived by the city's public. The situation in Poznan can be better understood if we look at two other cities in the German eastern provinces, Wrocław and Gdansk. And here in this context, Poznan is the only major city in this context where the Polish population was in the majority. Wrocław was the largest city of all the eastern province cities and had a barely significant Polish minority at the late 19th century, whereas Gdansk, the influence could be always located, the Polish influence. In Wrocław, at the end of the 19th century, we have two big museums. First, the Silesian Museum of the Decorative Arts and Antiquities, founded in 1899. That was a municipal institution by the city. And then we had its counterparts, the Silesian Museum of Fine Arts, opened already in 1880, which was under the control of the province. It was a province museum, but mainly an art museum. So the names already indicate that the focus was more on art, and the other showed arts and crafts and archaeological findings. What is very interesting in Wrocław, as I said before, there wasn't a big, large Polish population, but when we look also here at the museums and what the intention is, that they tried, both museums tried to counter the unloved cliche towards West Germany that Wrocław and Silesia was a culturally underdeveloped provincial and eastern city. In 1913, a large exhibition for the centenary of the wars against Napoleon, 100 years later, was a proclaim of Wrocław world historical fame. So it was always about its position in the German history. But in the field of arts and the decorative arts, museum staff still felt compelled to counter Silesian decorative arts that still often sounds like an excuse and a revoke. Other voices also tried to differentiate that this backwardness attributed to Wrocław in judgment applied at most to the 19th century, but not to earlier and later times. Therefore, quote, the stranger who enters the capital of Silesia for the first time is surprised by the many picturesque parts of the old town. Wrocław is not as poor in art, old and new, as most people who do not know it believe. Quote ending. The urban cultural elite developed a very offensive rhetoric of emphasizing Silesian cultural achievements, together with the supposed impression of a political threat as a region on the eastern border of the country. These cultural achievements were increasingly presented as exclusively German American. Thus, in 1927, so an interwar period, among the contributions to art in Silesia were the words of aggressive Turkish German nationalism. From Germany, quote, from Germany, Silesia has received all decisive stimuli. In spiritual terms, Slavism was completely sterile, quote ending. So this shows also in development in the perception of arts and nationalism. In contrast to Wrocław, in Gdansk, there was a city museum which opened already in 1873 and contains collection of art and cultural history objects, many of which had a historical connection. After the First World War, when the political affiliation of Gdansk was debated in the Treaty of Versailles and created the Free City of Gdansk, the nationalistic interpretations of local history in the Gdansk Museum became much stronger than in Wrocław, which also became a center of the so-called German Ostforschung. The Free City of Gdansk, however, the German Heimatbund created a decidedly political museum in 1927 with the founding of a state museum for Gdansk history, which was developed as a new type of museum. There was also a counter project of a Polish museum. However, this failed in the planning phase. In contrast to Wrocław, the Gdansk State Museum already defined its collection by cultural historical exhibits in terms of a claim to cultural political ownership during its time as a free city. So what I want to say is Camilla showed that also in this early, before First World exhibition, the exhibits were used as arguments But I had the impression that in the interwar period, it became much stronger, this argumentation. And when we look at museums before the First World War, it was still sometimes more neutral because it was more open to interpretation than later. In contrast, the city, in contrast to the State Museum in Gdansk, we had the City Museum that I mentioned first. That was interestingly less political. In 1930, for example, it showed a large Polish art exhibition of the Society for the Promotion of Polish Arts Abroad. So compared to the situation in Poznan, cultural institutions in other eastern provinces also pursued a decisive German cultural policy in order to emphasize the affiliation of the region and to fight against the cliché of backwardness. Not in Wrocław, but in Gdansk, like Poznan, but here in the interwar period, we also find a German and a Polish museum project in competition with each other. Let us turn to Poznan in the period before the First World War. I would like to turn my attention to the political situation in the region. Of course, Camilla also explained us, but I would like to tell this again. Since the Congress of Vienna in 1815 and the confirmation of the partition of Poland, we can observe a tightening of German-Polish relations in the region. In 1830, the special status of the province of Poznan was abolished, and that was a disappointment for Poznan's Polish elite, some of whom had come in terms quite well with the Prussian state. And there are two names, one was already mentioned. One name, very interesting, is Prince Antoni Henryk Radziwiłł, born in 1775 in Wilno. And he was the stadtholder of Poznan until 1831, and is an important example here. Among other things, he owned palaces, and also in Berlin, where later the Reichskanzlei was established, he had his palace, and also his family history built a tight connection between the Prussian capital and Greater Poland. And as also a symbol of the connection, the disconnection between those spheres. Another example is the already mentioned Count Athanasi Raczynski, that was born in 1788 in Poznan. And he was a Polish count, but also a Prussian diplomat. And from 1844, the Palais Raczynski was shown in Berlin on today's Reichstag's building, on the area where we find the Reichstag today. Was for 30 years, it showed an important collection of art. After its closure, the paintings went to the Berlin National Gallery. And then in 1803, when they went on permanent loan from the family to the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan. And even today, the collection formed the basis for the National Museum in Poznan. That's why they claim, I think, the largest collection of 19th century German paintings in Poland. So the Polish language and culture experienced ever greater restriction by the German authorities, while they tried even more radically to emphasize German in the regions. Lobby associations such as the Alldeutsche Verband and the Ostmarkenverein were advocates of an aggressive nationalistic policy towards the Polish inhabitants around 1900, which even resulted in demands for an expropriation law against Russian citizens of Polish nationality in 1908. Despite all these political and cultural measures, the fact was the exodus of German settlers towards the west, the called Ostflucht, could not be stopped by all those measures, also by the museum. It was in this context of alienation and growing antagonism that the Kaiser Friedrich Museum came into being. In border regions, we always find double identity and space in between. Sometimes it was not clear in border regions who was Polish and who was German. These identities were sometimes also situational. So in some situations, they identified themselves as Polish and sometimes as German. In any case, nationalistic politics did not contribute to strengthen what was united but separated. In her study, Camilla emphasized that the Germans in the city of Poznan were mainly immigrants who came to the city for professional reasons. This implies that they were not rooted and that there was a separate German and a Polish public. I wonder if this is not too clear, not too clear cut for a big city like Poznan. An example or just one idea, we heard about that there were 140,000 inhabitants in Poznan, and there are statistics that say there were 60,000 Germans and 50,000 left after the city became Polish. So that, but that means 10,000 Germans stayed. So at least this group must felt at home there or had a reason to stay and not to leave. And so what I want to say is maybe not everyone, all the Germans were not rooted in the city, even when it had such a strong change of the political situation after the First World War. Another interesting aspect is that Camilla shows that an art museum existed in Poznan before the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, the Milczynski Museum, which was founded 30 years earlier, thanks to the donor of Severin Milczynski. It had a bilingual visitor guide. Then there was an archaeological museum before that, the Museum of Polish and Slavic Antiquities. Yes, and this.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can comment later on it. This museum is said to have been the predecessor of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum. So we heard before there is a collection of antiquities in the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, and it came from an institution with the name Museum of Polish and Slavic Antiquities, but you were correct me, yes. In 1857, the museum was the Museum of Polish and Slavic Antiquities was founded by the Poznan Society of Friends and Science. In 1894, it was named the Provincial Museum of Poznan, and in 1902, it was renamed in Kaiser Friedrich Museum. And yeah, then of course a very important development in Poznan was that Count Anasy Rashinsky decided to give his big art collection from Berlin to Poznan. I wonder if the Kaiser Friedrich Museum was such a foreign body in the city, if it built on those traditions, so on the antiquities collection, and also why the Count Raczynski decided then to give his collection to this museum. It would be interesting to know why he decided to lend his collection from Berlin to this museum and maybe not to the Milczynski Museum. And I guess you have researched on that. Was it a national decision by him, or were there other reasons? And you wrote in another paper that the Nijinsky Museum was a collector of contemporary Polish paintings, played a dominant role in the first period of its existence. The exhibition was initially well received by the public, as we heard, but suffered over time from a lack of transparency and presence of works of inferior quality. And yes, and the picture gallery could not set the standard that corresponded to those of the German Kaiser Friedrich Museum, which left the Polish Museum far behind. We heard also before, of course, those institutions were completely different finance, so their budget were enormously different. The success of the German museum also made it necessary to rethink the concept and the exposition of the other departments of the Nijinsky Museum. They neither met the scientific requirements of the time, nor attracted a wider audience to the museum. While the Kaiser Friedrich Museum attracted around 80,000 visitors before in 1911, the Nijinsky Museum was barely visited by 1,000 or 1,200 people per year. So this is about difference in quality and the terms of audience success. I would be interested to know, did the Polish residents of Poznan really not visit the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, where all the 80,000 visitors like Germans, and did only 1,000 Poles visit the other museums? So is it really so clear? Can we find out today even about those numbers? One thing is indisputable. The museum, the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, was an instrument of German cultural policy to give the city and the province of Poznan a German character. The museum was created in a highly politicized climate of cultural repression. You can easily find provable facts about the intention, but it is difficult to make statements about the reception, the perception, and the experience of the visitors in this museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pascal. And Camilla, would you like to?
Yes, I think I have to say something about the audience and something about the complicating history of the museums in Poland, because that wasn't true to say, but I wasn't not so concentrated about this topic in this paper. So maybe the audience. Of course, that is something unusual, that almost all inhabitants in the city went to the one Kaiser Friedrich Museum. It's something wrong, yeah. We think about it and we say, oh no, so great audience and so a great number of visitors. What is it? But in fact, this museum had a few institutions collaborated with this museum. I mean, the first one. It was the Kunstverein. The history of the German Kunstverein in Poznan was very complicated and began at the first half of the 19th century. But in fact, with Ludwig Kammerer, the director of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, Kunstverein growing very much and had very intensive collaboration with museum. In fact, Kunstverein sometimes bought the works of art and gave it to Kaiser Friedrich Museum. And there was another society, like a German Historical Society, very, very tough connection with Kaiser Friedrich Museum. So you know that this audience was, I think, regularly, and the fact that it's so growing when Kaiser Friedrich Museum started to acting in Poznan, that was connected with this kind of creation of the regular audience. It is possible that every German inhabited in Poznan went to the museum twice or 5 times in the year, I think, but it's something like the atmosphere and the population of Germans which was very connected with the activities of this museum. But that's true that we cannot be sure what is it in the number of these adults. We cannot be sure. We know only the statistic of the entries of the study room and the something like library in this museum. So we know the statistic, but not about the audience in general who went to Kaiser Friedrich Museum. That's true that the Poles, of course, went also to this museum. But after the First World War, almost all of them, art historians, Polish art historians, and people of culture in Poznan, almost all of them said that it was something unpleasant, something uncomfortable be in this museum, because it was like a castle of the Germans, yes, and they felt it. So you know, they went, of course, to see what's happening, what is it, or to see collection, of course, of Athanasius Raczyński also. But I think that that not so usual. In fact, that maybe not so usual at all. And the history of the museums in Poznan. So, in fact, that museum that you have mentioned, the Museum of Slavic Antiquities, that was the Polish Museum. It was created by Society of Friends of Society of Friends of Science, Polish Society. But in fact, it was only a museum in paper because it was the society had not any building, any space for exhibition, etc., etc. So, in fact, with Mielżyński donors and with Mielżyński creation of the Mielżyński Museum, this museum, Slavic Museum, was connected with Mielżyński Museum. It was the Polish Museum, which was created on and based on the Polish Society of Friends of Sciences, and the German Historical Society, the similar society like the Polish one, so in fact interested in the culture and history of the region, of course created its own collection, and that was collection which was a part of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum. Mm-hmm. So that was something totally not the same, not the same. Yeah, Athanasius Raczyński, of course, that not Athanasius Raczyński donated this collection to Poznan because he was dead in that moment, but his heirs, in fact, grandchild, I think it was grandchild, not direct grandchild, but in the other line of the Raczyński family, it's the so-called inflant line, because it was the line of Raczyński family which lived in the Inflanty, Latvia and Estonia, today's Latvia and Estonia, and they inherited this collection. In the same time when Raczyński palaces was destroyed in Berlin because of the creation of the Reichstag, yes, of the Reichstag at the same place. So the family decided to loan this collection to the Poznań. So this was decision of the family, Raczyński, I think, Athanasius Raczyński. The dream of him life was to creation the gallery in Berlin, and that was the purpose of his life, and that was done. But after his death, circumstances and political circumstances, and of course, the Reichstag and the seat of Reichstag in this place. So, everything was changed.
Great. And if I may, I would like to refer to this comparative perspective. Vasco was also mentioning more from the Eastern perspective. Coming now to the Western perspective and also German regional museums. In our post-conference volume, there's an excellent paper from Marina Beck, about Städel Museum in Frankfurt and Kunsthalle in Hamburg. And I was, of course, remembering her essay and trying to see some similarities or some differences. And I think that the striking thing in my perception was this, that what Marina Beck wrote was that those museums were a creation of bourgeoisie, like new elite. And this was this element of building a new position for the bourgeoisie and also this is auch der Bürgerlichen, and this was the element of the social strategy. And I was just wondering whether we could also apply this perspective to Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznań, because it's somehow to me not really clear, not evident whether this was more imperial. Of course, it was imperial instrument, and so we know, but to what extent it was also like a municipal museum, like, okay, there were those donations. So to what extent it was also an element of building up this German, yes, bourgeoisie ethos or kind of identity, this new modern elite bourgeois identity. Would you?
Yes, of course. I think you are right, and I think we could agree with this statement. And of course, it's not maybe some exactly the same thing like in other West German cities, but in this situation in Poznań at the beginning of the 20th century, you can observe something like the creation of the new population of Germans, because it was something else that this German population from the beginning of the 19th century, from the first half of the 19th century, etc., that was something new, and of course, in this population, what was very interesting, that in fact they were military men. That's true, and the people of the culture and the people of the science, because at the same time in Poznań the Royal Academy was created. It was not a university, but something like a university. So in fact, that new men came to Poznań, professors on the disciplines of the scientific disciplines from other German towns, cities, etc. Art historians too, the first German art historians, and Ludwig Kammerer also. So in fact, something like the creation of the new population with
new middle class.
Yes, new middle class. And I think the purpose, of course, the imperial purpose was to create this population who wanted to live in this city, who wanted to stay here. And of course, some of them stay, like Vasco was, like Vasco mentioned, that's right. And maybe that's the reason that the audience of the Polish Mielżyńskie Museum was not so special, because this 1,000 or 2,000 people of year in this museum, of course, it's not so impressive number. But this Mierzyński Museum was aimed to another published landed gentry aristocracy of Poland, of Greater Poland. So people who lived almost all year in the gentry houses in Greater Poland, and only in winter visited Poznań.
Right, so this was like more addressed to yes, like you said, landed gentry, so it was more exclusive in a way.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, very, very interesting. If anyone has any questions, of course, you are most welcome to ask. I have still many questions, as I had also the privilege to read your excellent book. So again, congratulations on this.
And one more question. How does the Jewish population come into place? How does the Jewish population come into place with the German population when it comes to visitor accounts or to visitor people who are visiting the museum, and how it now seems to me when you answered Augustine's question that or when Milena asked you that the German bourgeoisie was just arriving there or just developing in Poznan, and was it the same with the Jewish population? Was it later? Was it maybe earlier?
Very interesting question. Thank you, Elena, because actually I was also thinking of asking this also in terms of art patronage and donations. So if you could please come in with
the Jewish population in Poznań was, of course, not so large, not so big like a German. In fact, it was quite large at the beginning of the 19th century, but at the end of the 19th century, it was like a 5% of the inhabitants in Poznań. Much maybe bigger in Greater Poland when we see it all the region, but in Poznań it was in fact quite a small population, but involved very much in the in all this new institution which was created at the beginning of the 20th century. They were very much interested in the creation of this institution, like a Royal Academy, like museum, library, and few of them were the donors of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, very important donors, because in fact the Kronthal family was the first family who decided to create something like the foundation with museums, so foundation Stiftung to buy some works of art to the museum, to donate some works of art to the museum, and to create some kind of maybe society who will support the museum. But of course, the First World War ended this initiative. But in fact, this population was very important to the development of this museum.
And in this, let's say, aspect of Jewish history, the let's say circle of those friends of the museum, supporters of the museum, this was very much resembling the situation in Berlin. And Hugo von Schudi, who was acquiring so many French paintings, this was possible thanks to also many Jewish art patrons and collectors like Mendelssohn Bartholdy, for example, or I don't know about other names, but there were really many families and Jewish families, and this is also interesting strategy, in my opinion, to somehow to understand their way of thinking, like donating French art to the national museums institutions in Berlin, in a sort of a patriotic, of course, let's say, gesture. Yes, we are giving our property to the national institutions, but still this property, this art is French, so it's not really welcome in the Wilhelminian era. Yes, so this is very, this is like a tricky point. How was this, and this is also maybe to both of you also a question, do you have any explanation for this relationship between museum director and museum management? And there are those big names like Wilhelm von Bode and Hugo von Tschudi, and in Hamburg, I think this was Alfred Lichtbach, yes?
Yeah.
You were mentioning Vasco in Breslau was?
So the art museum had quite a lot of different directors, but the one that from the city museum that collected the art and crafts was called Karl Maßner. And also there we see they are also, there's a big organization also supporting the museums. They have a lot of Jewish merchants that donated a lot of art to both museums. And the interesting thing is, they felt like part of the societies and they donated art to the art museum. But when we look at the Art and Crafts Museum, they also donated Jewish ritual artifacts. We saw them also in Poznan.
That's right.
And it was quite clear that they were part of the general collection. And so in the interwar period, the City Museum of Wrocław presented one of the biggest temporary exhibitions of art and crafts of Jewish ritual objects ever shown in Central Europe, a big exhibition in 1929. And also parts came from Poznan, from all the regions that were shown there. And of course, it was a temporary exhibition, so they gave back most of these objects, but the other, they remained in the museum, even they were run by a Jewish museum society. So there was a Jewish museum society, but they were really tightly connected with the City Museum. And they had their collection in the City Museum. So it was out of question that they were part of it. And in 1933, they had to leave the museum. And then they founded their own Jewish museum in Wrocław that existed for 5 years until 1938, the pogrom. And then you see the exclusion then, that the Jewish community that felt part of the city and wanted to be entangled in the city history and were shown as part of the city history, then was excluded. Okay.
And was it important? Was there any once an idea of creating a Jewish museum like it was? I just wanted to ask because in Warsaw there was a 1910 Jewish museum from Matthias Besson, and this was like exactly devoted to the Jewish ritual objects. So something similar happened in Poznan, and there were no reports.
Only private collections, only private Jewish collections, which contains the objects, the ritual objects of the Jewish culture, etc. But in fact, sometimes we can read in some sources from this period that Kronthal wanted to create something like this, but that doesn't happen. It didn't happen, and maybe that's only idea of Alfred Kronthal from this time. But I think that maybe it's a question like identity, but two identities. Yes, the one which was connected with Jewish culture. I'm a Jewish man and I wanted to create something which is the monument of the Jewish culture, the monument of the Jewish art, etc. And I'm in it. But the second was the identity of the German, of the German state, of the German empire, of the part of the Germany and the part of this, I don't know, state, maybe like regional, maybe regional identity and national identity, something like this, of course mixed. In case of the Jewish collectors.
Very interesting. And just two last questions, maybe from one side. One particular, particularly referring still to the Kaiser Friedrich Museum. So this acquisition of Claude Monet's painting, the only acquisition of Ludwig Kämmerer, who bought then the only painting from Impressionists, and this was then also somehow a flop. So it was not acknowledged. It was assessed as a misunderstanding, and it was not this proper German art which would fit into the the museum's policy. Yes.
Yes, but in fact that wasn't Kammerer, but Kunstwerk, which was operated with Kaiser Friedrich Museum. But I think that is something tricky to say to the public, you know, I didn't do it. Kunstwerk gave me, so you know, I'm everything is okay. Yes, of course. But in fact, of course, this painting is still one of, I think, the only one painting of French Impressionism in Polish, in Polish museums, and this is the fact that Kaiser Friedrich Museum.
We owe it to Kaiser Friedrich.
Yes, that's right.
German failure in the policy. Okay, and just if I may, very last question, maybe like general to both of you. What do you think in this? Let's say connection or those entanglements of museums policy and this museums scene, as we mentioned, all those big names like Bode, Trudy, and their relationship with art patronage, with collectors. Was it more that the inspiration came from the museum's side and from the museum's management and those big curators and directors? Or was it the other way around? Was the idea, for example, buying French art in Berlin and acquiring, I don't know, other examples of German art in Poland? Was it coming then from the side of those collectors, also then connected with Berlin? And maybe also relating this question to Breslau. What do you think? Was it like from which side which side was the triggering side, giving the inspiration to proceed the policy of the museum and acquisitions?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think that maybe I'm wrong. My first thought that was definitely Bode and Trudy, and because you know the key figures, the key people, the so important people in the history of museums and the reform of museums at the beginning of the 20th century. But in fact, all this connection between museums and private collectors and the groups of private collectors, not individuals, but the groups of private collectors, that is something bigger. That is something that we can research it all the time, in fact. And you know, we always see something else when we think about it, and when we read the correspondence between directors of the museums and the private collectors, etc.
Those were often like private ties, friendship ties, and this is really difficult to separate.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I would confirm this. You have the directors that have, of course, their ideas, and they're all connected to the big museum scene. You know, so all those. I mean, when we talk about the sources, when we look, I mean, those letters, luckily, they are mostly still there. You can look into this, and they were constantly offered artworks, constantly, and but they were all, of course, connected with other museum directors, and they knew what are the trends, and but also the collectors itself were informed what is now on vogue to collect and what not. And I'm not sure if this is completely right, but I think that when we look at the art scene, it's much more professional and much more connected by each other, that there are certain trends. But when we look on arts and crafts and the antiquities, there we see more also some local trends. And they are look more, there is a stronger, I mean, you have also, as you shown, the European objects, but then you have always local objects to compare. And so in this field, of course, they look all of the European trend. We need an object from Italy, one from France, one from Central Germany, one from Eastern Germany. But then they look for their local things. And there, of course, it's much more close. And it's suddenly only about the region, only about the city. And once they want to tell the history of the region, there it's more the question of how we show it, how we present it. And also this is, again, a big national topic. You look in the big cities, you look in the West, how do they show it? And then, okay, we show it the same way. So there's also, yeah, I mean, there are wonderful papers and studies about from those times, contemporary material, discussing those ways.
Yes, and also this, what you were showing, Camilla, in your presentation, like taking into consideration not only those written sources, but also the photograph, the documentation, visual documentation of this, how the display was arranged, how those collections were arranged in order to retrace the narration of the museum. Yes, for example, the national, the regional, and so on. So this is all very, very, very interesting. Thank you very much for this really exciting evening and for this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Camilla, and once again, congratulations on this book. And we are really looking forward to having the translated version in German. We are really crossing our fingers so that I hope that today's evening and this discussion will be also sort of a triggering point for like arranging this and having the books translated into German. I think it would be really for the German audience really an interesting book. So thank you. Was really I was looking carefully, like I'm really impressed with how many things you covered in your book and how deep, in-depth analyze you've made, not only with art patronage, with policy, with education. So always really in this book, we really highly recommend it. Thank you, Vasco, for your comment, excellent comment, and bringing this comparative perspective also with Breslau and with Gdańsk. Thank you for today's evening, and I would also like to thank liebe Ariane, vielen lieben Dank. We thank Deutsches Kulturfonds for this cooperation. We had to figure out a model where more academic and more popular model will work out, but I think it worked out pretty well. So thank you again very much. And thank you, Kuba, of course, for Jakub Sawicki, for the technical support. Thank you to all our viewers, and we are looking forward to seeing you next time, and this will be in December. We will have Dorota Łagocka from Warsaw University having a paper on collecting museums policy in terms of animal studies, so very current, very, very contemporary humanities topic, but so we are trying to cover this museum and collection bright thema from really various angles. So you are most welcome to join us in December. And thank you. Have a lovely evening, and thank you again. Bye. Depende, oder? Kuba? Ja.
Nothing,
Yes.